Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I am so thrilled. I am so thrilled because I have, as a guest, someone who is very famous in the Criterion Collection community, enthusiast community, the film fan community, the podcasting community. He is a kind of not kind of he is a hero of mine in many respects, not least of which in the realm of film enthusiasm and intelligence. A truly one of a kind individual whose scope and grasp of cinema is epic and breathtaking. And I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit of his insight into his own cinema journey and other things. So this is none other than Mr. Matthew Gasteier. Matt, hello.
Hey, I don't know how I'm going to be able to live up to that. Everybody on your channel is going to be like, who is this person? I have no idea.
No.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best to wear it
You
well.
are you are so kind, and you are so modest, and but you are always filled with great insight and exciting conversation
I
in
appreciate that.
a lot of aspects. I'm really looking forward to this, my friend. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I feel the same way about you. So it's a pleasure to talk about all this fun stuff that we love so much.
Exactly. Yeah, we love this. It's cinema. It's so much fun. But I suppose you mentioned a little bit about. Well, let's begin with the podcast work that you do. Again, as a means to introduce you to people who might be meeting you for the first time. So, Matt, could you just tell us a little bit, maybe for starters, about the podcast work that you are doing at present and where people can find you?
Sure. Yeah. I co-host a podcast called The Complete with our friend Travis Trudell, and we cover each season one director's filmography in order, in chronological order. Each episode is one feature film. We cover all their feature films plus TV miniseries if they have them. We started with Stanley Kubrick, went to Elaine May, and then Krzysztof Kieślowski, and now we are covering Satoshi Kon for our fourth season, and we should be recording our episode on Paranoia Agent in the next week or so. So we're over the hill in terms of halfway through the season, unfortunately. Very short career, but we're really enjoying it. It's our first, obviously, animated director. So it's been fun to do, and it's always a real pleasure to do the show. We really try to dig as deep as possible, read everything we can, at least in English, that has been published on our filmmakers, and we talk for way too long about each one of the movies, but we hope that people get a few choice nuggets of insight out of each one of our episodes, because we sure have a lot of fun talking about these great films and filmmakers.
This podcast work that you and Travis do is really fascinating on so many levels. I think again, just to follow up on this, so the idea or concept is you go through the entire filmography or body of work, shall we say, of a particular filmmaker artist. So one episode, more or less, to per each work, or maybe depending on the length of work, maybe one or two per episode. Is that the concept?
Yeah, one episode per work. We've only broken that rule one time, which is actually one of the episodes that you were our guest on, for the Decalogue, because it's such a massive, towering work. We broke it up into two individual episodes per podcast episode. So we did, episode 1 and 2 on one episode, and so on. You were on our episode 9 and 10
Yeah.
episodes, so the final 2 episodes of Decalogue. We had a lot of fun talking about those really wonderful works of art. And yeah, so Paranoia Agent is a tough one for us because it's we went into it saying, oh well, this is a mini season, so we're only going to just do 1 episode on it. And after revisiting it, we were like, oh my god, we bit off way more than we can chew here. There's so much to talk about. It's such a dense work of art. So but we're going to try to do our best to at least cover the big points in a couple of hours.
If you don't mind me asking, and please, of course, don't worry. I mean, don't reveal anything that you wish to remain secret, of course. But to the point that you're willing to reveal some of the secrets of the podcast, could you let us in a little bit as to maybe some of the reasoning or some of the thought that the two of you carried out to make the choices that you did? So what were some of the reasons behind those choices of these particular filmmakers?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. The first season, I wanted to do somebody who everybody knew, and were sort of well-known films, accessible, but at the same time still worthy of kind of in-depth discussion. And so Kubrick just seemed like a natural fit for that. Um, Obviously we've eliminated some filmmakers from contention just because if we did John Ford, we'd be here for 20 years, especially at the pace that we put out episodes. And we try to take our time in between episodes to really dig into each film. So it has to be somebody who is worthy of consideration, but also has a at least reasonably sized filmography. Early about halfway through Kubrick, we decided to do Kieślowski, and then we decided it seemed like a interesting approach to take smaller filmographies from filmmakers who had not had the opportunity to build up their filmography, either because they unfortunately passed young, or because of the industry restrictions that were placed upon them. In the case of Elaine May. So we picked Elaine May. We wanted to pick somebody who was different than Kubrick. And it was, we also wanted to pick somebody who wasn't just a white guy, knowing that we were going to do Kieślowski next. So I've always really appreciated Elaine May's films and wanted to dig into them a little bit deeper. I hadn't seen a couple of them, so that that's always nice to be able to approach new works. So we picked her. It was really wonderful. It was also a bit of serendipity in that as we were recording the season, Criterion announced Mikey and Nikki. So it was funny, and the same thing has happened with Cone, actually. Since we decided that we were going to do Cone, not only did Paranoia Agent get released on Blu-ray in the US, but Millennium Actress, also Tokyo Godfather. So almost all of his filmography that was missing from US shores came out since we decided to work on him. So if you have any filmmakers who you want great great works to be released on Blu-ray, let us know. We'll do a season on them. But yeah, so I mean, I think that's really what it comes down to. The next season, I'll break little news I've already given away, that in other places. But the next season is going to be on Agnes Varda, which we decided after she passed. It seemed like since it was fully time for a complete season of her. And of course, then Criterion announced their complete Varda set. So we've been very lucky in that regard, and we'll have a beautiful box set to dig into for that season.
So it sounds like the Blu-ray gods are listening.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is really wonderful. And thank you very much for sharing with me a little bit of how it works behind the scenes, behind the curtain, as it were. And it also brings me to some other questions, which is, well, one of the follow-up questions I have would be for, you mentioned the idea that you wanted to choose quote unquote cinemakers that were quote unquote worthy. And so this brings me to the kind of criteria that you bring to the table as far as those filmmakers that you think are of a particular are worth speaking about and are worth spending and devoting this time and energy in terms of a very careful discussion of each of the works. So could you give us a little sense maybe of what you consider to be a type of a sense of what is worthy in terms of maybe the artistry of cinema filmmakers that you are considering?
Yeah, I mean, I think usually what that implies is a sense of, sort of artistic credibility. And in some regards, I agree with that. But I think there is, when people say, worthy of deep discussion, I think they start to think about filmmakers like Tarkovsky and Dreyer and all people that I love, Bergman, all directors that I have great respect for and would 100% do a season on. But I think it can also be filmmakers that have a more kind of entertainment bend, who weren't necessarily considered to be auteurs or sort of sophisticated art house cinema. We've discussed doing a season on Tony Scott, to give you an example. I think that I think it's really about, do their films reward multiple viewings? Do they have a sense of sort of a voice or a through line throughout their work? Not necessarily a consistent theme, but a consistent sense of how they view the world or approach each piece of material. And is it, is it not just kind of entertainment that is disposable? Which to me, the vast majority of film falls into that territory, because ultimately, hundreds of people work on these movies. They put their life into it for, sometimes multiple years, at least many months in production. There's a lot of thought put into even the worst movie you saw last year, So I think I say, worthy filmmakers. I think a little bit of it is just like, do I want to spend time with this person's work for a really long time? Because we spend, especially for the filmmakers that have, the big seasons, more than 10 movies or so, we're going to spend a year plus thinking about this person, thinking about the work that they've done, writing, reading about it, watching their movies, watching their shorts, watching everything they've done, basically. So that's a lot of time to put into something. So you want to make sure that it's somebody that is going to be rewarding to you, because we're ultimately doing this to learn more about film and to have conversations with people that we respect and enjoy talking about film with. So I think that's how we approach it. It's less worthy in terms of sort of quality filmmaking, because I think that covers a huge number of people, and a huge number of filmmakers, many filmmakers that I don't even know at this point. But it ultimately, do we want to spend our time and effort on investigating these movies?
Oh, that makes sense. Yes. So that also leads me to the question, which is, when you then make your decisions, the two of you, and you, of course, being here, when you have that decision made, and you are about to explore or currently explore the body of work of a particular filmmaker. What does that mean? Let's say in the examples that you've already done or now are under, now that you're currently undergoing, which is, do you already know these filmmakers' works pretty much ahead of time, and it's a sense for you for revisiting and maybe a reconsideration? Or are some of these journeys that you are undertaking first time watch, first time journeys for you? What's the type of ratio, or the type of that type of journey ratio that you have undergone in the past seasons with these filmmakers?
Sure, yeah. Well, with Kubrick and Cohn, I had seen all of their work already.
Okay.
But it had been a while, especially with Kubrick. I think for a lot of people, uh, I share the path of, you get, when you get into film, you watch all of Kubrick's big movies. That's he's a real entry point. And so, in that sense, it was revisiting. We haven't covered any filmmakers where I've haven't seen any of their movies previously, but in Kieślowski in particular, his early work I had not seen at all, especially his TV work. I'd seen Decalogue, I'd seen Three Colors, Blind Chance, but it was very illuminating. It was nice to be able to, I had some of these films I had sitting on my shelf waiting to be watched. In the case of the Kieślowski TV work, that's included on the Arrow box set, but I hadn't dug into it. So it's a nice kind of motivation to do it. And when you know that you're going to talk about something, you don't want to sound stupid. So you want to really pay attention and think about the work. And I find, and I found this with my writing as well, where I know that I want to write on a film. When I originally did a Criterion blog years ago, knowing that you wanted to write on something means that you are engaging with it at a higher level, because you don't have the opportunity to just put it down and forget about it and move on. You have to kind of think about how you feel about it. And even if you only write like a paragraph or a post on Letterboxd, I think it helps give you the perspective of how you really felt about something. To put pen to paper or to type it up, I think you're rewarded more, I've found, by really interacting with the work of art that you just spent a couple hours at least thinking about.
And for you, my friend, what does that mean, or what does that translate into in terms of, for example, say the number of watches that you need in order to be able to feel comfortable with it? Is there a type of process that you find in general? I know it can be maybe it can be a case by case type of thing, because films are different depending on the content and the context, I understand. But in general, do you find that you are able to engage with it, say, on a single watch basis, or do you find yourself engaging with it on multiple views before feeling comfortable, say, in terms of writing about it or discussing it on a podcast or elsewhere?
I find this, well, so for the podcast, we both watch a movie at least twice before we cover it, um, often 3 or 4 times. And not all of those viewings are close viewings. Sometimes sometimes I watch it with the sound off, or while I'm doing something else, or while I'm taking notes, just to remind myself. I mean, it's what a remarkable time we live in to be able to have the benefit of that. You read essays from people 50 and 60 years ago, where they're basing their entire books off of their memories of these films, because they don't have access to them. They saw them at a festival once a couple of years ago. So I love being able to have that opportunity to revisit a scene, or to to watch something on my computer while as a refresher for it. To me, that's a great advantage that we have. um, I do have filmmakers in terms of things that are not on the podcast. I do have filmmakers that where I kind of consider them to be dry run filmmakers. Like, if I watch an Edward Yang film or a Tarkovsky film for the first time, I love the experience, and I get a lot out of it, but I don't put a lot of stock in how I felt about the film, or what I think of its meanings, or sort of how it sits in the filmmaker's filmography, um, because I feel like their movies grow with each subsequent viewing. And so I think you kind of need that time to be able to sit with something to really know how you feel about it. um, but there's plenty of filmmakers that, I mean, I don't need multiple viewings for Furious 7 to know that it was awesome. You know what I mean? Like, I'm okay with just I'll go back to it because it's super entertaining, but I think there's just different approaches to different types of film.
That is really well said in terms of the effects of, say, time and experience, and how yes, how that can definitely
Yeah, that's true
transcend.
too. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
I
yes,
mean,
please.
with the Kubrick films, like, my relationship with those has evolved significantly. I mean, when I revisited both Doctor Strangelove and Clockwork Orange were pretty major movies in my teen years. I still love Doctor Strangelove, not as much as I used to. I had real problems with Clockwork Orange, both from like the perspective of like it's a queasy movie. I mean, intentionally so, of course. But also just I saw more flaws in it, or at least what I perceive of as flaws. And so, whereas Barry Lyndon, to me, is his kind of towering masterpiece. And not necessarily how I used to feel about it. So I think, yeah, for sure, it's an evolution both of kind of your relationship with the work, but also an evolution of yourself. And so therefore, the work evolves with you because you're getting older or wiser in your perspective, or you just have a different experience that you're bringing to the movie. I think sometimes a good example is like Tarantino's movies. Like, I got really into Pulp Fiction when it came out. You mentioned kind of entry points earlier before we got on the conversation, and that was a major movie for me because I kind of realized, like, oh, that this movie is commenting on other movies, and in order for me to be able to fully understand this film, I have to go back and watch older movies. Now I'm not that big of a Tarantino fan in general, and not that big of a Pulp Fiction fan. And I think sometimes we, as like film fans that get older, think of it, oh, I'm wiser, I'm more mature. But there are plenty of people out there who still love Tarantino when they're older. Some people who didn't like it when they're younger, but love him now. So I think you have to kind of look at it from your perspective, as I'm a different person. I'm not necessarily like a smarter, wiser person, because I don't like Clockwork Orange now. Like, doesn't mean that I'm more mature. It just means that I'm a different person. I'm a different film viewer than I used to be.
And to borrow another example that you brought up just a moment ago, could you explain a little bit in terms of your engagement with the film Barry Lyndon? I think you referred a little bit to maybe when you were younger, maybe you didn't take to it as much
Yeah.
as you do now. Could you explain a little bit as to that evolution, as it were, with regard to that film?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think there's a lot of like 14-year-old boys that are really into period piece dramas. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, they're out there, I'm sure, but it wasn't my bag at the time. So that part of it, I think was hard for me to get into. I think it was one of those movies where it's like, this is very slow. It's beautiful, don't get me wrong, but it's very slow. and I think I just had a hard time engaging with the human drama of it. I think also, like, I didn't fully understand how funny it was. There is I think part of that is like getting older, understanding kind of the dynamics between the people in it. But I think it's also just having a different kind of patience for movies, training yourself to watch different kinds of movies. I think one of the reasons why Kubrick is so successful and so popular with a broad spectrum of people is that his films can be appreciated by people who haven't watched a lot of movies, but he also rewards viewings from people who have been exposed to a broad range of films. I think the sort of great filmmakers that are also sort of well known and popular, some Kurosawa is another example, I think. These are filmmakers that you don't necessarily have to have a huge amount of viewing behind you in order to fully appreciate. I think other directors, not so much. I think it's harder, especially directors that are not from your culture, because you're not exposed to that type of filmmaking attitude, tone. These are things that are learned, behavior through watching TV in your country, watching commercials, watching, just movies with your friends or with your parents. It's a lot harder to kind of dig into somebody who comes from a different culture than you, but also who kind of approaches work in a different way, even if it's somebody within your country, who approaches work in a different way than other filmmakers, or sort of is the dominant filmmaking of the time. I think that's true of times too. Like, you need to learn how to watch movies from the 1940s, which is weird because they were hugely popular in the 1940s. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like people in the 1940s were like, I don't like movies from the 1940s. They're too weird. They're too old fashioned. Like, it was just the popular movies of the time. And so I think, people don't realize that they've already learned how to watch, Star Wars. It's not that Star Wars is sort of a more accessible thing. It's just that that's what you grew up with. So you're used to it.
Yeah,
I
that's
rambled a little bit there, but I hope I kind of made my point.
it made really really well, I think. Thank you. Yes, I that is a point well taken, and that has a lot to do with context. It has a lot to
Yep.
do with I think also speaking very very well about one of the reasons why cinema is so great. It's this type of window, as it were, into this otherwise unknown world, right?
Yes.
I mean, I'm not from a lot of these places and worlds and situations that are often depicted in these films, but yet there's a sense of commonality that can be drawn from these experiences that we see embodied in celluloid. So that is, I think, a point very well taken, and it's also showing or indication, I think, quite clearly as to the kind of perspective, or shall we say viewing philosophy, that you very clearly espouse, which is one of many reasons why I really respect the type of insight that you always bring to the table. And it then it brings me to the question, which is, uh, looking at you where you are now as the film enthusiast that you are. Obviously, it had to start somewhere, right? And so I always like to ask this of my guests, and I want to ask this of you, which is, where would you say your film cinema journey started in terms of your growing up? Or another way to put it would be, as you were growing up, what were some of those early film experiences, the milestone moments, as it were, for you, that really did something to you in terms of your cinema loving consciousness to bring you to where you are today now as a lover of cinema. So what were some of those early stops along your cinema journey in the early years of Matthew Gasteier?
um, yeah, I mean, so I grew up in Los Angeles. I was born in Philadelphia, but moved to LA when I was 5. And my mom is a big movie buff, especially classic film, classic Hollywood film. So I've been watching older films for my whole life. And my parents go see way more movies than I go to the theater to see these days. You know, every weekend they see at least one, if not 2 movies. I guess, you know, pre-COVID, obviously. So I was always at the movie theater, mostly seeing movies that I was way too young to see. You know, I was born in 82. I saw Shortcuts in theaters, which, you know, I think I was 9 when that came out. It's not appropriate. Actually, when I saw Pulp Fiction with my parents on opening night at the Man's Chinese on Hollywood Boulevard. I was 12. And we walked out of the movie and my mom just turned to me and said, "You were too young to see that." We just like got in the car and drove home. I loved it, of course, so it was great for me to see. But yeah, I mean, movies were all around me, you know, and then obviously, like, I knew people who worked in my friends' parents worked in movies. You know, I saw famous people all the time growing up in LA. And you know, there was just a sense of like, both, this is something that I really love, and this is the industry of my town. You know, this is where people make movies. That's what people do. They grow up here and they make movies. Pulp Fiction was a huge movie for me. It really was. I got, you know, I think there was sort of the basic like teen boy appeal of it. The sort of highly stylized violence, the taboo subject matter, the sort of casual but brutal conversations. Those are obviously super appealing. But then there's also like the tapestry of time that he constructed in the film, and the references to both older movies and older culture, you know, the 50s diner, all this stuff that the great soundtrack, like all these things that sort of were the tip of the iceberg, pointing to this huge world that I had only sort of tangentially been exposed to. My parents weren't showing me the kinds of movies that Tarantino loved and grew up with and became obsessed with, and made him want to make movies. And so I really just started digging much deeper into it. You know, I think I got like one of those cheesy, I think it was before like the 1001 movies to see before you die books, but there was like an Entertainment Weekly top greatest films ever made book that I lost somewhere along the way. I think I looked it up once. It's available online for like $1.50 used. But it was like a top 100 greatest movies of all time. Then they had like dramas, TV movies, documentaries, sports movies, like, you know what I mean, all ranked. And I just went through that whole book, watching almost everything that it had. I mean, it was actually not a bad book. It was probably written by like Owen Gleiberman or something, but it was the #1 documentary on it was Harlan County, USA, which is not a bad pick. I think that might actually still be you know, up there for me as one of the greatest documentaries ever made. So being able to see all these movies, in LA, I had 3 video stores that I could walk to from my house, you know, so it's just an abundance of riches there. So I would come home. I would sometimes have my carpool in high school drop me off at the video store, and I would rent movies and walk home and watch 2 movies after I did my homework, or while I was doing my homework, on one of those like 13-inch TV VCR combos that I had in my room. So that was big for me. And the other really big thing for me was, I read this, like, in some movie magazine, they had somebody wrote a list of the best movies that are not available on VHS. And that blew my mind. Like, the idea that there are movies out there that wouldn't be on video available to you, like, it had never occurred to me. Um, but I, one of the movies on it was Trouble in Paradise, Ernst Lubitsch's Trouble in Paradise. And I love Lubitsch. I've loved Lubitsch ever since I was a kid. And I made it my mission to find this movie so that I could see it. And they actually finally showed it at there used to be, I think it might still be there, a silent movie theater in LA. And they had Talkie Tuesdays, and one Talkie Tuesday they showed Trouble in Paradise, and I got to see it, and it instantly became my favorite movie. I loved it so much. And one day I was in my local Amoeba, the local used CD and movie store in LA, and saw that Criterion had put out Trouble in Paradise. And that was a big, like, I knew Criterion already. I think the first one I bought was Red Shoes. But I was in love with this company forever from that. That was the end for me. So that sort of kicked off my, I guess I have to see all these Criterion movies, huh? And once I got Netflix, I started trying to watch as many of them as possible. And that really kicked off sort of the deeper dive. Previously I was into some older movies, like I'd watch TCM, and I was, watching whatever came out that year in theaters. I would go all the time. But once I started watching more Criterions and getting more into foreign film, that really opened up the whole world to me, and that was kind of the next big jump for me.
Oh, this is so cool. This is really cool. I want to ask you about this next phase. You describe it yourself as the next jump, as it were. But before we go on, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about Ernst Lubitsch. So you said you were a fan since you were little. And so may I ask, what was the genesis of that? What was your entry point into this world of the works of Lubitsch, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no. So let's see. They kind of all mashed together for me, the big ones. I think the first one that I really got into was Ninotchka, which I think actually I entered through Billy Wilder, because my mom loved Sunset Boulevard. And so I would watch Sunset Boulevard all the time. And then I saw Double Indemnity. And that, to me, I mean, that's just like what classic Hollywood was made for. It's just like, that dialogue is so snappy, perfect. It's just a wonderful experience. And so I got really into Billy Wilder. I tried to see as many of his movies as I could. And then, realized that he had written movies previously. And he wrote a lot of movies for Lubitsch. And so I watched Ninotchka and read a little bit about The Touch. I mean, probably the best example that people, or the most used example, is Greta Garbo's hat in that movie. She walks by the window and poo-poos the capitalism of it early in the film. It's just a really great device. And so that was one of the first times where I was like, oh, okay, like, these filmmakers are really thinking about kind of callbacks and layering in visual cues for the characters and things like that. Shop Around the Corner was another big one for me. But then I think I was a little older and just randomly saw Heaven Can Wait on TCM or AMC at like 1 in the morning or something, and I fell completely in love with that movie. I still am in love with it. I think it's just a beautiful love story and a wonderful portrait of a kind of scoundrelly but lovable ragamuffin. Um, and so that was really what transformed it. And yeah, I mean, I've always been like a really big romantic comedy fan, especially like screwball comedy. His Girl Friday was always a big movie around my house. So um yeah, I think Lubitsch to me is just the pinnacle of that. Like he's both funny and highly entertaining, but also very sophisticated and you know, like we were talking about, like very worthy of in-depth analysis.
And then thank you so much for that. I was smiling the entirety of that. That was wonderful. And it also brings me to Criterion, the Criterion Collection, which I think is which is the common ground, I think, where you and I were able to meet online in these various Criterion groups here and there. And so and of course Criterion related podcasts and the like. We have mutual friends, and you were often guests on a lot of these podcasts, and so that's where I began to know of you. And so it was a real thrill for me to have the opportunity to meet you for the first time. So that was great. But it brings me to Criterion. Now, you said, what was it? The first Criterion that you got was what, the Red Shoes?
Yeah,
How?
I think it was the Red Shoes. Yeah.
Now, so that means that you were also a fan of Powell Pressburger as
I
well?
actually only knew the Red Shoes at the time. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think my mom had showed me the Red Shoes, and I was very into it. There was also, I think it's still on the Blu-ray, but on the DVD there was like a Scorsese introduction. You know, he was a huge proponent of them, and so I think that helped for me as well, because Scorsese was another early filmmaker for me, especially Goodfellas, a movie I've probably seen 200 times or so. That kind of connected the dots, you know, between like both. In some ways Scorsese is kind of just like an older version of Quentin Tarantino. You know, they infused love of movies so much into their films that it's very easy to, once you've gotten in, you know, fallen in love with one of their movies, to follow the dots back to earlier films. And yeah, I mean, I just finished this is a tangent, but I just finished the World Cinema Project 3 box last week. And I think, you know, what Scorsese has done with that project is his greatest contribution to film, and he's made a lot of great films, but I will be endlessly grateful to him for what he's done there. But anyway, yeah, I think that was part of the reason why I got Red Shoes. It was, I probably paid, you know, the normal $39.99 price for it or whatever. It was, you know, there were
Oh,
no half off sales at the time.
the early DVD version, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, 39.95, I think.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So no sales, right, at the time,
oh,
as I
no.
recall. But and they would sometimes, I don't, depending on the store, it would be in those huge plastic things,
Yes.
you know, for the I
So you,
guess the, yeah.
yeah, so you didn't shoplift it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So and then you would only be able to unlock it at the register, or
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, so those were so unwieldy. It was
yeah.
fantastic. Yeah. But oh, so this is let's talk about then the next phase, or you jumped to the next phase in your cinema journey. So now you have watched films like Pulp Fiction. You're obviously getting into more of these labels, like, you know, Criterion was already in town, but as you indicated, these were ways that you were able to recognize for yourself the vastness of the world that is cinema, and how there are references to references to references, and it leads to different things. And you mentioned these let's say resources, such as the greatest films list by genre, or maybe you're following a particular filmmaker and it leads you to a different film, it leads you to a different, and then it leads you to a different filmmaker, as you mentioned earlier. Yes, could you please, yes, further enlighten us about your continuing journey as you're getting as the years are passing here and you're becoming more and more involved in the world of cinema? So what were some of those other further landmark stops along the way for you as you are further going along your cinema journey here?
Yeah, I'm scrolling my shelves as we talk. I think you know, really in the 2000s. I became a music critic really briefly, and got, I'm also a pretty big music nerd. So I spent a lot of time digging into that, and lost track of my cinema love, or intense focus on it for quite a while. Was always still obviously watching plenty of movies, trying to keep up with all the um, big stuff that was coming out, both in theaters and at home, in home video. I ended up writing a book, and then uh, kind of felt a little aimless, decided like, I don't want to do this music thing anymore. It's a big hustle. Don't become a music critic, it's terrible. But I think what happened was I really decided, okay, I'm going to do this music thing, movie Criterion thing. I'm going to try to watch all of these. Like, I've been meaning to get around to doing this. I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna try to keep up with what comes out, and then supplement it with the previous stuff. At the time, I think they were in maybe like the 500 range or so of spine numbers, so it seemed reasonable. I'd already seen maybe 100 or 200 of them, so it seemed like a reasonable thing to try to go after. And then I started a blog just to keep track of like what I'd watched, and to kind of keep up with it. Like, it helped me with the momentum. Like that week, basically, about 50 Criterion movies, 50 or so, came on Netflix streaming. And that was huge, because then I didn't have to order the Netflix DVDs or buy them. Like, they were just right there for me. So I went nuts with that. And right when I finished that bundle, they announced the Hulu deal, and they put up almost everything that I hadn't seen. And I thought to myself, like, I can actually do this. Like, I could actually see all of these movies. It really is possible. And it took me 5 years to do, but I did it. I'm now, actually, as of this week, I've seen everything that they put out through Spine 1000, and a little bit further than that too. I think the one I haven't seen, the next Spine, is Mondavi, which I actually own. I just haven't gotten around to watching it yet. But it took a while, but it was great. And that was really the next journey in my film watching. It wasn't necessarily a particular movie. It was forcing myself to sit down and watch a lot of movies from filmmakers that I didn't necessarily like that much, that I ended up loving by the end, because I had trained myself in how to watch their movies, and discovering some filmmakers that I had never really even heard of, that became sort of my new obsessions. Max Ophuls, Melville, a lot of these directors that I just hadn't really been fully exposed to before, and learned about this whole world of cinema that I didn't know about before. But also, like, filmmakers, like, you know, we've had many conversations about Ozu. He's my favorite director. I've spent a huge amount of time with his films. I've seen all of them multiple times. The first time I saw Tokyo Story, I didn't like it very much. I didn't get the big fuss about it. It just seemed like a pretty slow family drama about, you know, a couple of people. It made no sense to me that it was like a top 5 Sight and Sound movie. But I had to watch a whole bunch of Ozu movies to see every Criterion movie. And by my 3rd or 4th film, I think it was The Only Son really that clicked for me. And ever since then, I haven't looked back. I mean, I think, you know, I think he's the greatest of all filmmakers. And it is the process of exposing yourself to things that you wouldn't otherwise be exposed to, just by the nature of sheer force of saying, I'm going to sit down and really try to understand why people love this, or why, you know, what is significant about it. You start to understand kind of what you love about movies and sort of how you interact with them. It's not even necessarily that you're forcing yourself to love everything, because there are filmmakers in the collection that I'm still not a fan of, even though I've watched a lot of their movies. It's more about fully understanding, giving everything a fair shake, and fully understanding kind of what you love it or don't love about something. It helps
That
you, it opens up the world to you.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that is so well said. And there's also something to be said too. I didn't realize it until you were speaking just now, but there's something also very, very legitimate and very important about trying to identify what one doesn't like
Yeah.
and why one doesn't like that. And that's, I think, just a worthy a conversation to have as what one likes. And that's not like a negative conversation, but it's also just, as you say from the outset, how we react based on our own upbringing and experiences,
Yeah.
and what the film is what how that affects our engagement. So that is really that's interesting. And I have to ask then about the example of Tokyo Story. Could I ask, what was that thing or gathering or collection of things about that film that made you see it in a different light versus how you saw it the first time? What
Well,
were could you be?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's a very good Ozu movie to start with,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. Like, I think there's now I consider it to be you know, certainly one of his greatest works. I'm a late spring guy, but you know, Tokyo Story is unquestionably a masterpiece. But I think it's you know, it was really watching his other movies, and I think the simplicity, the sort of pared down narrative of The Only Son and There Was a Father, that box that Criterion put out, and Late Spring too, is you know, there's deep complexity under those films, don't get me wrong, but I think on the surface, in terms of their pure narrative drive, they're very focused, lean stories, as opposed to Tokyo Story, where there's just a lot going on, a lot of dynamics between the characters, a lot of things unsaid. You know, it's also true of Tokyo Twilight, where it's like those kinds of stories, you expect a different kind of drama and narrative energy from. And so when you don't get them, it just seems like they're a bit inert, you know. And I think that is something that you kind of have to train yourself to be able to see, if you are used to films like Goodfellas and Pulp Fiction with explosive filmmaking, you know, which there's a place for, but there's also a place for these deeply kind of I don't want to say profound. I mean, the other thing about Ozu is that he is an entertainment filmmaker. He's not sort of that was, I think, also my problem, actually, now that I think about it. Like, I'm rambling a bit here, but like, Tokyo Story, ultimately, like, you approach it, especially if you know about like Paul Schrader's Dreyer, Ozu, Bresson, transcendentalism. You approach it as this film that is like Tarkovsky, it's art cinema, and it's this profound, deeply spiritual experience. And that's not Tokyo Story at all, and it's just very there's a strong disconnect between, I think, what the expectations are going into a film like that, and with its reputation and associations, and what you actually see on screen. So you have to kind of get beyond those expectations of what an Ozu movie is in order to fully appreciate his films, which is kind of funny, because the expectation that you have is that they're going to be very complex and difficult and very hard to appreciate, but they're actually very easy to watch. They're very entertaining, and they have a lot of humor and life in them. And it's your expectation that they're going to be difficult that makes them difficult viewing initially, and you kind of have to get over that.
That is really fascinating too, because it would then, I would suggest as well, to borrow your framework, which is, once one sees maybe the accessibility of particular stories because of certain family dynamics, for example, in certain brand of Ozu films, particularly in his later career, that we see, that becomes in many ways our ability to access them. But once we access the world, it then brings us back full circle into this idea of, in fact, it's a much more complex
Right.
world than we realize. So you
It's
bring it
true.
up so well. There's a certain type of expectation perhaps that leads to a different kind of experience, but then we realize that perhaps there's more going on than meets the eye. And that leads to the further complex. That's well said, my friend. That is so, yeah. That's great. And also, I was thinking along the way as you were speaking about Ozu, about how in this idea of accessibility, and also how he is a filmmaker who is so, in many ways, when one watches an Ozu film for the first time, I think it's a shocking experience. It can be really
Yeah.
shocking because, for I think the exact reason that you're pointing out, namely, it goes against one's expectations, especially even in the context of, say, a quote unquote family drama, in
Yeah.
terms of what kind of information is given to us versus what is withheld. And I don't want to be too specific for anyone who hasn't seen an Ozu film, but generally speaking, those can be very surprising choices. But
Yeah.
it also reminds me too about, I don't know, but it's like, if I'm thinking about my own family connections and people that I know, sometimes I just know them through rumor, or I know things that happen through rumor, and someone told me, oh, this event happened in this person. So it's almost like I'm not privy to certain bits of information, even within my own family circle or extended family, but I can still understand the connections. So sometimes I feel that way when I'm watching an Ozu film. It's like I'm watching a sort of extended family experience, and
Totally.
I don't know, I haven't attended all these events, but I
Mm.
know through what people have told me, and that becomes the way that I get the information. So it becomes like a lived-in experience expressed through Ozu. So it's something that you feel is unexpected, but the more you realize, the more one realizes that it's more accessible than meets the eye. But then when you access it, then it becomes more complicated. The more one
I totally
yeah.
agree. I totally agree. I mean, well, we could talk about Ozu for hours, but I think, especially with Tokyo Story, there's this real perception that Tokyo Story is a movie about kids who are ungrateful towards their parents. The parents come, and the kids are supposed to value their parents, and they don't value their parents, and then that's the end of the movie. And that there's so much more complexity to the dynamic there, and there's little breadcrumbs throughout the film. And I actually just wrote a piece about this for a project I'm working on. But there's little breadcrumbs throughout the film that really point to a world of experience that these characters have had together that we are not privy to, and we do not fully understand. The strong implication of it is that we do not fully understand these interactions that we're watching on screen. And I think that, to me, is one of the most kind of profound points in Ozu's films, and he does it without us knowing it, is this very intricate dialogue and plotting that that points us towards these motivations and character relationships that cannot possibly be shown on screen because of the limitations of any narrative story, essentially, that he's presenting the things as they really happened. But because of this complexity, there's a richness to the behavior of these characters that will remain eternally mysterious to us, because to produce it on screen would be impossible. So he's merely just sort of presenting life as it is happening to these characters, with the weight of their whole lives behind them. But we can't access that. It's extraordinary. I think it's one of his most incredible skills as both a writer and a director.
May I ask some examples that you cite in terms of these breadcrumbs? I would be remiss if I didn't. I have some ideas, but please, could you give me some examples?
Well, I don't want to spoil it, because I will put this this work out that I'm writing. But it's I think the biggest one is that the father used to be an alcoholic. It's something that they mention a couple of times in the film. Both his wife and his daughter mention it. His daughter says, he used to drink all the time. He can't just come home drunk. It's something that is completely unnecessary in the film's story. It's not something that needs to be included. And it's not, and again, it's not to say that he was, that the ultimate point of the movie is that the dad is this secret alcoholic who was abusive in any way. It's more just that, like, her relationship, I think her name is Shige in the film. Her relationship with her parents is more complex than we know. And the fact that she comes across as this selfish and thoughtless woman, and many of her behaviors are repulsive. We have to recognize at the same time that there's more to her experience than just her whole life being selfish. That these characters have had things happen to them, have had things done to them, that they have these interactions that impact the behavior that we're seeing on screen.
Yes, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but for example, I mean, I say I don't want to go into too much detail, but I then say, for example, but you mentioned the character of Shige, yes, and there's a very quick moment where she's talking a little bit about, or she's talking with her mother, the character of Tomi, and about a little episode or something that happened when she was a child, and her mother, and an episode of leading to some kind of embarrassment.
Yep.
And that may or may not, right? We don't know. It may or may not be some kind of indication as to how she feels about her mother, or maybe her parents, by extension. Yep. And that's not in any way a kind of, what is it? It's not meant to be a plot point that will be resolved in Act 3, right? But that's right. It's something that is elusive, yet it could hint at something there beneath the surface. I would say also too, with the parents, there is always this within the dialogue, it's almost hidden about how, in terms of is there this, what kind of relationship did they have before we met them in the film,
Yep.
in terms of how, in particular, how how he might have treated her.
Yep.
And there are little hints as to certain indications of what that could have been, both at the
We're on the
beginning,
same.
middle, yes, yeah. But I won't, you know what I mean? Yes,
Yeah.
yes, okay, okay. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
sure. No,
So
it's a fascinating thing, and that movie is often taken very much at face value, and again, it's not that he's saying, and I'm not implying that the perception of people is wrong. I think in a way Ozu was kind of pointing out the ungratefulness of the children and trying to, illuminate something about this. But I think his skill as a writer and director is that he realizes that that's not the entire story, that there's more to it, and that both of these things can be true at the same time. And yeah, I mean, I think it makes that film, and Tokyo Twilight that I mentioned, I think is similar in terms of there's more going on under the surface there, than, especially with the father, than meets the eye. It makes them just so rich in human motivation and behavior, and I think ultimately it reflects back on you, like, what are the things that you bring to bear on your interactions with your own family. It's impossible to watch a family. It's kind of like when when you're young, or if you're single, you go and meet you go to your girlfriend or boyfriend's house for the holidays. You see those interactions and you get kind of the family dynamic, but you have no idea where that dynamic came from, how it's been built, because there's a huge emotional and physical history behind these interactions that it's impossible to fully comprehend if you weren't there, and even hard to comprehend if you were there. I mean, sometimes I'm surprised by my behavior around my parents, because it's a depth of history that it's impossible to fully comprehend. I think that mystery is what Ozu puts into his films, that a lot of people mistake as spirituality.
interesting. Oh my goodness. You've given me a lot to think about. Um, I have to process this. This is really wonderful for me. Well, as I'm processing this, this great insight, let me ask you, before I forget too, you had mentioned that you also like the film. In English, it's called Late Spring. And so could I, could I ask you, what is it about that film that that does something for you, if you don't mind me asking? The film Late Spring by Ozu.
Yeah, well, I mean, Setsuko Hara is like, not, I mean, I think that's a wonderful performance from her, and she's probably my favorite movie star ever. And I think the film, I mean, the richness of that film, certainly the family history comes into play in that film as well. The mystery of kind of what happened to her during the war, what happened to her brother during the war. They don't even mention the mother. So that, that's very rich. But then there's also this extra layer of the post-war occupation of Japan, that is very apparent throughout the film, and that I think interacts with the story in very interesting ways. But I think ultimately the movie is a kind of a swing point in film history. It's this halfway through the film century, and it's grappling with these issues of tradition and modernity that I think speak to the evolution of the medium in a really fascinating way, that is not necessarily intentional, but I think really plays into kind of like how we view movies, how we interact with these characters that are on screen. and how time impacts our experiences. And I think that that's part of the kind of literal story that is being told in it, but it's also part of the larger narrative film that makes the movie sort of especially sturdy under the weight of history. I think there's very few movies that you can kind of hold up to that high regard. For me, that's one of them, because it's able to kind of tell the story of its medium as effectively as it tells the story of the characters that are within it.
Bravo, bravo, well said. Well said indeed. That is one of the best summations of that film that I've come across. Much better than I could ever hope to achieve in
You do a
terms of.
pretty good job. I think,
Oh,
it's a movie that I've watched over and over again. I cry every time. I think it's a beautiful movie, and so I've spent a lot of time with it. I haven't gotten to the point where I'm writing an essay on Late Spring yet, and I'm very intimidated by it because it's a very difficult movie to kind of encapsulate. What makes it so special.
yeah, but you really captured very well in terms of its sweep
Yeah,
and its real macro level impact in terms of it. I love what was the word that you phrased, that you, a swing point, is that right? Or
yeah,
and in terms of a transitional type of film, or let's not a film, but a film that is capturing the essence of what the transition means in many contexts, in the course of history, in the course of time, in the course of the war, in the course of the
yeah,
changing sweep of culture and dynamic that was happening in Japan at the time, as well as the very micro level, intimate relationship dynamics between a father and a daughter. That is really profound. Yes, yes, and so much more. Yeah. Some breathtaking bicycle action.
yes.
To Yes. So it's all that and more, and it's charming. It's cute, and it's happy and sad. And you're right. There's a lot of hidden meaning to it, both
Yeah,
within the
and
context of the film and beyond. Yes, please. Yes.
well, no, it's also made for an audience, like
Yeah.
it's a star make it's a, I mean, she was already a star, but it's really a star performance. There's shots of her that are as glamorous as anything that von Sternberg did for Marlene Dietrich in that movie. So it has all of that, but it's also just purely on a pure level, a good time at the movies. You know what I mean? I think that there's very few directors that are able to kind of do both of those things. He's often like compared to those other kind of art house filmmakers. I think he's more similar to somebody like Chaplin or Hitchcock in the sense of being able to deliver that entertainment first and foremost, but putting much more kind of rich subtext beneath the surface.
Well said, my friend. Absolutely brilliant. And as you as you indicated, I think we could go on
Yeah.
about. I mean, we didn't. I mean, I should I ask about Ozu's silent period? But well, let's move on from Ozu, as much as it hurts me, because there's a whole world of silent cinema that we have yet to talk about. But so returning a little bit to to your journey, as it were, and one of those stops was Ozu, and is Ozu, and quite magnificently so, if I do say so myself. It's what wonderful insights you have there and elsewhere in terms of cinema and your observations in cinema. And so, I guess then complete the journey, as it were, up to where you are now. So you have uh, experienced cinema, say, through the Criterion Collection and its own catalog. And as you say, there were some discoveries along the way that you made, as well as the reinforcement, shall we say, of filmmakers and works that you were already familiar with. But as we know, and as you've indicated, there's something very magical about the re-engagement with a particular work that reveals something, I think, potentially quite extraordinary. But just, I guess, to round out the journey conversation, what were some of those other, let's say, examples of those types of discoveries, either first-time discoveries or rewatch-based discoveries, that you could say were very important to you, that led you to where you are right now?
Oh, let's see. Well, I think um, last year at Marienbad is another one that was a big movie for me. I think I had always kind of been a bit disgusted by that kind of film, you know, that like disgusted is maybe the wrong word, but sort of dismissive, I guess I'll say. You know, I think I had this perception of more abstract or experimental cinema as being pretentious and the kind of thing that, you know, only people that think that they are too good for regular movies watch. I think that also, like, you know, that can be a misconception about cinephiles in general. Like, I think there is this sense of like, once you get into movies, you're into all types of movies, but also like that the idea of eating your vegetables, you know, that there's films out there that aren't actually enjoyable, but that you somehow have to kind of, you know, stuff down your throat and let them sit in your stomach just to prove that you are a true cinephile, who can, you know, watch anything. I just straight up loved that movie. And the first 30 minutes, I was like, what am I watching? This is basically a parody of a student film. I have no idea why this movie is so well regarded. And then like halfway through, I got really into it. And I was like, what's happening to me right now? Why am I enjoying this so much? And by the end, I was blown away by the fact that it was able to not just sustain my interest without a true narrative, or traditional narrative, I should say, but that I was genuinely engaged with it and came away with kind of deep theories about what was going on, but not, you know, not anything that I thought was like actually definitively happening, but that it felt like a work that you can really interact with, you know, and take whatever you want out of it. So that was a big kind of realization point for me. And then you know, the Eclipse series was huge for me as well, because when that was first announced, I thought, those movies are too obscure. I'm not going to bother with that. I only want to watch the greatest of great movies. You know what I mean? Life's too short not to watch, you know, to watch something that's not on the Sight and Sound 250 or whatever. And then I decided, well, I've watched all the Spines. I might as well do the Eclipse series too. And a couple of those boxes were transformative for me. I mean, especially the Chantal Akerman box, which I love, and you know, she's probably growing to be one of my favorite directors now. Never would have watched her films without the you know, project to watch all of these movies. The Matarazzo runaway melodramas, I'm obsessed with. And you know, you mentioned like, if you have any film recommendations, please please watch those movies. They are bonkers, like beyond bonkers. And they're great. I ate those up. And that was a real big wake-up call for me, because they're not masterpieces. Nobody would ever say like, oh, these are the greatest films ever made. They're just incredibly entertaining. They were big box office hits in Italy at the time, and they speak to that era, that culture. They have something to say, whether it's intentional or unintentional, about what people valued at that time, in particular what women valued at that time in Italy, in post-war Italy. And that's something that you can get from a lot of like the neo-realist classics of the era, but it's not the same as being able to watch these movies that had a real genuine impact on people's lives. You know, I think the first one of those that I watched, my comment on Letterboxd was, you know, if I was a mom in post-war Italy at the time this movie came out, and my kids were at school and my husband was at work, I would go to the movie theater and watch the shit out of this movie. You know, because like that's a really unique opportunity to be able to see kind of what people were into 80 years ago and fully appreciate it. But they're also just bonkers, balls to the wall, like just out of control melodramas that are really fun to watch. So that was another big moment for me where I was like, well, okay, I can watch these movies and all these great movies, but I should also be watching the movies that are just like really good, not necessarily great. You know, like explore these other areas, these other genres, these other movements in film that aren't necessarily, you know, up there with the French New Wave or any of this other stuff. It really, you get a lot out of it.
Yeah, thank you very much for mentioning that great set, the Runaway Melodramas Eclipse set. Yeah, that was a great. I agree. What a lovely kind of surprise, because I wasn't
Yeah.
familiar with these films when I had first encountered that particular set. So it's like Chains or White
Yeah.
Angel. Yes, but
Yep.
it was as you described it, as a type of wake up call in the way that you describe it for me too. What a wonderful suggestion. That's a great recommendation. What a great set. That's still in print, right? I think.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So are those films available on like the
They are.
Criterion channel as well?
They are, yeah. All of them are, and then there's a couple others that are only on the Criterion channel that are equally good, I think, and
Oh,
equally bonkers.
oh, that's wonderful. That is
Yeah.
wonderful. So then, yes, the Eclipse series, which it's still officially going on, right? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, I was so happy to see them come back, but I mean, I think the Ingrid Bergman set is worthy of watching. The Autant Lara set was not my favorite, and so it was kind of a disappointment for them to put out a kind of middling Eclipse set, knowing that kind of it was on the series was on the bubble. You know, I kind of wish that they had put out kind of more of a blockbuster set to get people buying them, and then that would warrant more releases. But I think Koreski leaving Criterion hurt the series, because I think he was a big champion of the series.
And please forgive me for asking, because I don't have the Criterion channel, so I don't know directly. But so is it the case where you can watch most of the Eclipse series films through the Criterion channel at the moment?
Yeah, the vast majority are on the Criterion channel, and will always be. I think the big ones. So the Flamenco trilogy obviously is out of print and is remarkable. Carmen, I think, is a really wonderful film that everybody should seek out. that's not on there. And then the Lubitsch musicals are also not on there, although a couple of them have cycled on and off for temporarily. But I think almost everything else is on. I'm sure somebody will correct me in the comments, and please do. But I think almost all of the other films are available on the channel, which is how I watched most of them. I own the 3 Ozu sets and the Lubitsch set. I'm trying to think if I have any. I don't think I have. Oh, I have the Shapitko set, which is wonderful. Wings and The Ascent, which The Ascent was just put out on Blue, but those were really, they blew my mind. I couldn't believe how great those films were.
And I think I'm actually going to be speaking about the Ascent Blu-ray release very soon. It's and it's a great release because it has a number of her works, other works that are actually quite. I mean, I had never seen those other works before, so it was very eye-opening. And there are some great interviews included. But
You're making me have to get this set now.
it's a
I'll have to rebuy Ascent.
yeah, it's if you're gonna rebuy a film, that's certainly one. That is a tough work in the best possible sense of that word, and I mean that so complimentarily. It is very intense, very dense, and so poetic. But I'm so glad you mentioned those. Yeah. My goodness, I'm I'm kind of at a loss here because I'm just overwhelmed by this information. Because my goodness, this is why I was waiting for this opportunity, my friend, because of these nuggets of inspiration that you always provide. Truly, it's such a great pleasure to listen to this. I'm getting my own personalized podcast, I think. So I'm so happy about it. Thank you so much for this. But and may I ask, so now, what is your film watching, say, routine? Do you, I mean, you've mentioned before about you watched a lot of, say, the classic films from a very early age, and maybe there was a period where when you were focusing in on your music criticism work, you were still watching the films as they came out. You're trying to, as you put it, keep up with the times in a manner of speaking. But as far as your film watching habits go now, what would you say is the breakdown of films that maybe you're watching for the first time, new releases versus rewatches, films that you've seen many times or many times? What's the general schedule for you in terms of what you're watching these days?
I would say the vast majority I'm watching new films new to me, but not new to the world. older films that I haven't seen. There's just so much out there. It's hard to go back to the films that you've seen. I have 2 kids, 6 and 9, so there's a lot of rewatches in that regard. I just showed them Nausicaa a couple of weeks ago, and they loved it. So that was really great to watch it through their eyes. But we have a movie night. We'll have a movie night tonight. I'm not sure what we're going to watch yet. So I do a lot of rewatches of kids and leaning towards kid appropriate movies with them. And then, I have this Ozu project that I'm working on. So I'm doing a lot of Ozu rewatches, although I try to, even when I'm not doing that, I try to rewatch at least one Ozu every month or so. It keeps the body regular and healthy. I think I think I'm just a normal guy that buys too many movies kind of guy. I'm trying to keep up with the Blu-rays that I buy, and I'm falling dangerously behind. I'm still trying to keep up with the Criterion releases as they come out. I think right now, I realized that I only have about, like last year, I realized I only had about 120 or so films on the They Shoot Pictures list. I'm a list addict, basically. I have to cross the films off the off the list. So I figured, well, I might as well wrap this up. And so I've been trying to do that. I think I have about 60 to go. That's been really wonderful. Again, you know, you get to see movies that you otherwise might fall through the cracks. You know, especially like I watched a couple days ago, 20 Years Later, the Coutinho documentary from Brazil. What an incredible film. I mean, I was so blown away by how rich and moving of a portrait of both, like, uh, you know, a damaged society, but also filmmaking, and the power of cinema. It was, and that's not, you know, it was a sad watch. It's not something that you know, can't wait to throw on after a hard day's work. So forcing yourself to watch these movies sometimes, once they're on, I mean, it was a very easy thing to take in because it was so wonderful. So that's kind of why I do these things, is it puts movies on the docket that you sometimes I just want to relax and watch a pre-code, you know, 65-minute movie with Joan Blondell or something. But being able to take in films like that is I think, you know, ultimately why I watch as many movies as I do, to be able to find stuff like that.
No, that's really beautiful, because you're really pointing to, I think, one of the great, well, one of, I think, many great uh, sort of, utility functions, as it were, for lists, because they are these great resources in
Yeah.
terms of discovery. I mean, you mentioned earlier in your days about the magazine
Hmm.
that you discovered early. And you said you can still find it online for $1.50, I think. But
Yeah.
yeah, but right. But I think, especially, I remember those lists as well, and they were great things. And again, oh, these are films that I've seen, but oh wait, I haven't seen this. I haven't seen this. I
Right.
haven't. And that line of discovery becomes so exciting. You're right. I
Yeah.
remember when that you mentioned it earlier, the Sight and Sound list came out, right, in the what was it, 2012, 2013, when I first really, or 2012, I guess, right?
Yep.
And so right, so many films that not so many, but there were a number of films that I could recognize. But then what, right, what's this film? Oh my goodness, A Brighter Summer Day. What, right? And um at the time it wasn't available,
Yeah.
right? And now that we have the luxury of living in the times that we are now, but at that time, my goodness, yeah, that was very difficult to watch in a good condition.
Yeah.
Or,
Two that always stuck out to me on the Sight and Sound list were Brighter Summer Day and Color Pomegranates. Those are
oh
two
yeah,
films that
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I waited forever to watch, and being able now, it's just surreal to be able to look at my shelf and know that I have pristine versions of those films there that I can watch whenever I want. They're two of my favorite movies now, and yeah, we live in pretty marvelous times. There's still a lot out there that I wish would come, but it's pretty amazing what they have available to them. Sorry, I think there's a chainsaw going on somewhere in the distance. Um, yeah, I think it's great. I mean, yeah, I think that's why I get frustrated when people kind of poo-poo lists like the AFI 100 and things like that, because you know, I was a little old for that list when it came out. I had seen most of the movies, if not all of them, on it at that point. But for people who are just getting into film, um, you know, it's not a perfect list. There's things on there that I wish were replaced with better movies, but uh, it draws people in, and there are such wonderful works of art on that list. And to be able to have something that is so mainstream that people who aren't into movies, even when you say the AFI 100, they know what you're talking about. That's a great resource for people to have, you know, who don't know which cinephile websites to seek out to find the right movies, or to find the right people to give them recommendations, who live in a small town, who only have an AMC in their neighborhood, you know. It's worthy. It's worthy of doing for that reason, I think, because it does get people into film. And yeah, once you've done this, take your own path and find the things that interest you and pursue those things. Find the other stuff that is like it that interests you. But it's nice to have entry points for people.
No, again, well said. Well said. I agree with you so much about that. And again, you're right. There are so many people out in the world, and each of us are on our own journeys. And who's to say that I have the right to say to someone else, "Oh, this is what's good." That's the type of exploration and discovery process that we all go through, and it's a really beautiful one that we're able to do that. And have these lists as guides, as it were. And then they lead to other things, right? Because then they lead to filmmakers, let's say films that are featured here, but then that are not featured. And so we wonder, what are other films in this filmmaker's filmography? And that will lead into other possible avenues of exploration. Absolutely. Absolutely. These are wonderful lists. I kept track of there was a period in my life when I was really intently trying to watch all of the Sight and Sound, the current list, right, the critics poll list. And so, and it was still during the time where a lot of them had not yet been released yet on, say, a Criterion or Arrow or something. Now I think most of them, right? Am I correct in thinking that I think most are now available in some form? I mean, maybe
definitely over half are available. Yeah, I think
maybe
it is most.
the like the Jean Eustache film,
Yeah,
maybe is one of the few that's still a little bit difficult to get, right? Or
yeah, that all of his films are unavailable at the moment,
yeah,
which is a real tragedy. That's a very good movie.
yeah.
I've seen everything on the Sight and Sound list, the 2012 list, except for the Puppet Master, which is it's not available in anything. My library has the old DVD, but it's a pan and scan DVD.
Yeah.
So and it's very poor quality. So I kind of feel bad. Like I love his film so much, so I kind of feel bad watching it in that poor quality. So I'm hoping that a better version comes along soon. You know, I respond very strongly to his work, especially his 80s work, City of Sadness, Time to Live, A Time to Die, or really great movies.
Is there please forgive me for my ignorance, is the City of Sadness readily available?
No, that's another one that I've only seen. I saw on a poor DVD, but it was at least the right aspect ratio.
Okay.
I have a hard time watching those ones that are so cropped, especially with somebody like him who has such impeccable framing. I mean, it just seems like a tragedy. I can't wait for Flowers of Shanghai on Criterion. What a gorgeous, smoky, hazy masterpiece. Great film.
Yes, I was.
But yeah, more of his would be really wonderful.
Yes, Ho Xiaoxian. Yes, I was so fortunate to be able to catch Flowers of Shanghai in the theater when it was showing.
Oh
in
yeah,
New York. When I was, I think, I was still a student at the time. So
that's awesome.
That was really marvelous. So yeah, I agree. That there is a filmmaker who deserves all the attention in terms of his works. They're amazing. But that's interesting. And actually, we're almost due for another Sight and Sound list, right?
Next year.
Next year. Is it next year? Right. Great. 2022. So My goodness, time flies. Time flies. Do you have any, I don't know, maybe it's still early days yet, but do you have any guesses as to what might be the top listed films there, or is it
I
still too
mean,
early to say?
yeah, it's probably too early. I will be really interested because some of the, like, for example, Brighter Summer Day and Color of Pomegranates are films that are relatively, I think, low on the list
Mm.
for their kind of significance and artistry. So it will be really interesting to see these more widely available movies if they move up as more people see them.
Mm.
I feel like Citizen Kane is gonna retake number one. I don't know. I feel like people think like people were mad and let it slip. But I kind of hope it's something new. I don't know. I mean, I'd love it for it to be Tokyo's story, but he's got the problem is late spring is a vote splitter. So the worst vote splitter though is Coppola, I think, who has I think Godfather and Apocalypse Now maybe in like the top 15.
Yes.
So he's in trouble, but I don't think that'll ever take its place. But I don't know. I love Vertigo, so I think it's a worthy number one. I think Citizen Kane is too. It'll be really interesting to see. I think just generally over the last 10 years, as home viewing has really exploded and people have gotten better theaters at home, better these Blu-ray discs that look impeccable. Uh, People get region-free players, so they're able to play movies from all over the world. I think there will be more of a shakeup than has been in the past. And I think there will also, especially, it started in 2012, but there will be more of a push to get a more diverse panel of voters, from all over the world, all types of people. Um, I think that will help the list to gain a little bit more diversity of cultures, of languages, of filmmakers. And so I hope it's significantly different because I like to see that change. I like to see the evolution of that thinking.
Yeah, that's also well said. Yes, I'm also very curious, I think, as many
Yeah,
people would be. And I know you know this as well. You can appreciate that. I mean, a list is a list, right? And so it's not meant to be the be all
right.
end all for everyone concerned, right? It can be for some people something that is a point of curiosity, or maybe it's something that's completely worthless and without meaning, or it can mean something that means a lot to a certain number of people, or maybe a lot of people. And so, but in any event, it is a type of indication as to how at least a certain group of people think. And
Right.
so, in that way, it does hold a considerable degree of value. That's for sure. And so,
Yeah, definitely.
um, but again, right? Do we have to agree or disagree with it? Of course, right? We can choose to work with it as we want. So, but I too am very curious, and so. It'll be right as you say. It's only a year away, so but and a lot of Criterion releases will be made along the way. A lot of other Blu-ray
Yeah.
releases will be made along the way. I mean, before we move on, I do want to point to. So you've mentioned a lot of streaming services, but you also mentioned some physical media, and also you mentioned how you grew up. I think we're maybe in the same generation in terms of like the VHS era, and in terms of we maybe, I mean, I remember what it was like in terms of home media with VHS, and letterbox VHS was at the time when it first came out, that was a big deal. Before it was pretty
Yeah.
much non-existent, and of course there was laser discs and Criterion laser disc, but those were still pretty exclusive items, I would say. I mean, not everyone had a laserdisc player at the time, so
Right.
uh, so could you just give us maybe some of your thoughts or comments about, say, the times we are living in, and the type of maybe accessibility uh, uh, accessible. How should I put it? I think in many ways, a lot of people describe this time in terms of physical media and streaming and access to films as a type of golden age or continuing of a golden age. And regardless of what one might think of the future of the Blu-ray industry, for example, it still is I think a glorious time for this type of accessibility. How do you feel about the times we're living in, and this type of atmosphere in terms of the accessibility of movies and what keeps continually coming out and released every single week? It seems like we're getting a release announcement from a label every week, I think.
Yeah.
How would you feel about that, my friend?
I am just so jealous of young cinephiles, people who are 13 and 14 getting into movies now. They have, I mean, we used to walk in the snow uphill both ways to the video store. No, I mean, oh, what a world. I mean, I remember, I think that when it really struck me was when Filmstruck started, and they put up the Essential Art House bundle, all the films that are included on those discs that Janus has the rights to, that they just put them up there. And I mean, there you have this incredible resource of movies, many of which were, not available, some of which, I mean, I remember the first time I saw 8½. It was on a blown out VHS with white lettering on the subtitles. You could not read any of them because it was white on white. And, I just sort of muddled through it and loved every minute of it. But to be able to do this now, to the push of a button, to be able to play Bicycle Thieves, to be able to say, read about Seventh Seal and say, I guess I should watch that movie and find out more about this Ingmar Bergman guy, and go to my TV and hit play on Seventh Seal. Oh my God. Like, oh, wow. I mean, I just, I think when you get into cinema, you can get a little caught up in like the narrative of like, oh, everything's teal, or look at these, this subtitle has a typo. There's a typo in the Stalker subtitles for anybody who's curious. And I think you just need to sit back and say, like, we live in a golden age. Oh my God, the things that are just right there for us, and that I can hold all of the films that Agnes Varda made in her 60, 70-year career in my hand, and be able to play them anytime I want in pristine condition. Wow. I mean, it's remarkable. So I think most of the youngsters out there, all the whippersnappers know how amazing it is. But I think it's always worth just reflecting on the fact that we are really lucky that it wasn't always like this, that you had to go to the movie theater to see a beautiful version of a movie that you loved. And even then, sometimes it was a bad print that had been sitting around for 20 years and scratched to death. Now we have perfect versions of these movies that we can play whenever we want. It's incredible. It really is.
Yeah, again, well said, my friend. And yes, I really do believe it's a continuing type of golden age. And I don't know about you, but there's always this idea of how long Blu-ray can last. And of course, streaming is
Yeah.
I think developed quite considerably, especially over the last, say, year or so, in terms of the number of options that have been made available commercially. And that's true, I think, in Japan as well as in North America. But still, physical media, for whatever reason, it's just, I mean, just by the type of announcements that we get from these various labels, these are films that I mean, right? I mean, some of these I'd never even thought about. I mean, maybe I saw the VHS box, in the corner when I was a kid, and then and then suddenly I get this flashback to those times, and it's just even beyond, there's this type of real sense of exploration, a real keen sense of exploration on the part of a lot of these labels that I think is it really should be applauded. I mean, they
Yeah.
really, a lot of them really go above and beyond and really commit to, as I say, it goes back to the comment that you were saying before about what it is to be worthy. And it just reminds me about how there is this lovely sense of subjectivity, and I really mean this lovely sense of subjectivity that brings out, I think, this great respect and earnestness on the part of the us, the film, the people who love to watch the movies, and it really gives us the opportunity to how should I put it? Uh, it's like you have to really love these films in order to be able to invest so much of your time and energy into them. And I'm talking about the labels, and I'm also talking
Yeah.
about the people who buy these and who watch them. And so there's this wonderful way that these are providing great avenues and examples for us to watch and love the things that we love. And so and the variety is just overwhelming. It's too much for me, and I think that's great, but it's so overwhelming. And yeah, I agree. We are truly in a golden age. Truly, yeah. I hope it continues for a long time. I don't do you have any sense as to how long do you think this can last, or
Well, it's obviously it's not like the cash flow years of the mid 2000s.
that's true. Yeah.
I mean, the I was it was fun. It's funny. I was about to say the days of the Imamura box sets are over. Thinking of the old Criterion box set, but he just got a beautiful box set from Arrow, so maybe they're not entirely over. I think these are certainly now labors of love for these labels, as you said. Like they don't make a lot of money at this. It's not it's not the way to get rich in the film industry, is to go into the home entertainment business. But my hope is that there's enough of a community out there to support the works that they are putting out. I think there is. I think these labels continue. um, I think these big boxes from Criterion have been a, a huge boon for them, and hopefully, I think because they're selling so well, they're allowing them to have more of a budget for some of the smaller films that they are putting out on a regular single disc Blu-ray, which is great because those middle spines from Criterion, when they could put out anything and it would sell, there's some real great gems in there. Some stuff that would never be released on Blu-ray today, that they put out. And so I hope it does continue. I hope streaming continues to get better and improve the quality, and I hope the Criterion channel does well. I hope Ovid does well. I think it looks like they have fewer than 1,000 subscribers. That's a great service for anybody who's interested in the sort of lesser known areas of film, and the smaller labels, documentaries, documentary shorts, experimental film. So yeah, support those small businesses, and hopefully this will all keep happening as long as we can take it. I don't think a 4K move is going to happen anytime soon. And I worry about the format in general. I don't think it's selling very well. But here's hoping physical media never dies. I always want to have those actual things I can hold in my hand.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, yes. Yeah. Well said again. That is my conceit for this interview discussion. Well said, well said, because it's true. You're saying everything so wonderfully, as you always do. And so yes, I certainly hope the same. And uh, not that I have anything against any other mode of consumption of this product. I don't, but it's just there's, as you say, there's a kind of personal attachment, I suppose, and this ability to a kind of tangible quality, which I think is really important ultimately, at least for my benefit, because cinema is this wonderfully amorphous um, sort of it's impossible to grasp because these are ideas that we see, these are images, but it's just they conjure up things that are not concrete in this physical form. So we need that kind of, at least I do, I need that kind of ability in a tangible form to be able to connect. And it could be maybe in a maybe a surface level way, but still I think that that is very important in terms of a further reinforcement of this notion that we all build up in ourselves about what cinema is. Every time we watch a movie, what is it? Is it the stuff that we're actually seeing? It could be, or is it the stuff that it's conjuring up in our minds and those memories and those flashbacks to our childhood, or those feelings of exhilaration and excitement, right? Those are intangible and yet they are tangible at the same time. That's really the great paradox of cinema, I think. So
I love
uh,
that. Yeah, I think that's so true. I love that. I mean, to me, like there's certainly a borderline fetishism that comes with, you know, what we do, like
sure.
this
Yeah.
this idea of the beautiful packaging and, you know, arguing over the whether the cover is appropriate for the film. And I have fun doing that too, and I love holding a beautiful uh box set in my hands and unwrapping it. But um there you can't get too wrapped up in the accumulation of stuff, and, you know, not think about it ultimately as something that is meant to enrich you inside, as opposed to, you know, enrich your house with things that you can collect and amass. That's ultimately what cinema is for. It's to process in an intellectual and emotional fashion. um, I think, like, the, you know, the collections that I have, you know, I try to focus on directors in particular, uh, filmmakers that I really love and that I, you know that I want to revisit their work. I mean, I do this on the complete, but like the reason I do the complete is because I enjoy going through a director's work chronologically. Like I do that in my regular time as well. So you know, I'm always working through at least one or two directors in chronological order. Um, and I has, you know, it's really great to be able to have Koreeda's full, at least narrative filmography on my shelf. I have it. I know it's there. I watched them all in chronological order. It was a wonderful experience. And now I know I can do that at any time. I can go back and revisit those films. The same with Kieślowski. Eric Romer is, you know, one of my favorite filmmakers, um, and films that are wonderful to revisit. Those worlds, just, you know, a marvelous experience. And that's great. You know, it's great to be able to have that. It's not the same to be able to push a button on Netflix, you know, and to know that it can go away at any time, even on the Criterion Channel permanent library. Some films get pulled. You know, Ozu's first surviving movie is still not on the Criterion Channel, even though Janice had it on Hulu. It was available before, but I have it on a BFI DVD that I imported because I want, you know, I want all the Ozus that are available to me. So yeah, you know, it's a balance. You don't want to become one of those hoarders, but if you're really using it and interacting with it, I don't see any problem.
Well said, my friend. Thank you so much. And I you you mentioned Koreeda, and I was just thinking, oh my goodness, what I would, oh my goodness, there's so many things I need to ask you about Koreeda. So what should we do? I think, oh my goodness. Mm, I know we're running a little bit short on time now, and so oh my goodness, I think we need a round two one day to talk about Koreeda and others. Koreeda,
That'd be great.
Ozu's silent cinema, and yes, as well as many other topics. So, um, my goodness, this has been so amazing for me. I can't begin to tell you enough just what a great pleasure this was. As I say, I felt like I was getting my own like lecture or podcast. No,
I
really,
didn't have
really.
enough charts, I guess.
No, it was. I loved it. This was fantastic. Oh, Matthew Gasteier, thank you so much. Really, thank you so much for this opportunity. Can we do this? Can we continue this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, this was a pleasure, and yeah,
Oh,
I've enjoyed all of your interviews that you've had up, and always love to hear what you have to say about the new releases and any your Ozu series was wonderful. I watched that all the way through twice actually because it was so enjoyable. So yeah, no, it's a pleasure anytime.
oh, thank you so much, my friend. Yes, we have to continue this. So, um, uh, yeah, yeah. As I say, I'm still processing in my mind all these comments that you've been very generous in sharing with us. So, let us continue this. But for now, my friend, before you go, I'd like to just ask you, you've given us, I think, a number of great recommendations over the course of this conversation, interview, discussion. But maybe for the further benefit of me and maybe people who are watching now, would you mind giving us some recommendations? They can be film, cinema, they don't have to be, but any kind of recommendations you want to share with us. They can be physical media or films that are currently out on release, or maybe the things that maybe are not on everyone's radar, so to speak. What are some film recommendations or recommendations in general you'd like to share with us?
Let's see, I'm scrolling my shelves right now. Well, I mean, obviously all those World Cinema box sets are spectacular, but I think most of your listeners will know that as you've been preaching that for quite a while. I've been really delving into pre-code cinema over the last couple of years. It's just a delight, and it's really fascinating for film history. You really get a sense of the loss of from 1934 to the early to mid 60s, while the code was being enforced, of sort of authentic representations of gender dynamics, of politics, of racial dynamics, all of these things, plus like there's a lot of sex and drugs in it that you miss out on. But a couple of the movies that really, well, one of them that really stuck out to me that I had not been exposed to previously is called One Way Passage with Kay Francis and Frank McHugh. It's a really wonderful pre-code movie that I highly recommend. It's one of those sort of like, on a ship, far-flung, glamorous but on the run kind of movies. That is a really great film. The other one just came out on Kino this past year, is a Ruben Mamoulian film. Mamoulian is a really undersung director who peaked during the pre-code era, but continued making movies through the 30s and 40s. His most famous movie is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is a great film with some wonderful performances. But the one I want to recommend is Love Me Tonight, which is a musical that is very much in the kind of Lubitsch musical vein. It's with Jeanette MacDonald and what's his name from Gigi, the French singer. His name went right out of my head. Maurice Chevalier. And it's actually the movie that he made while Lubitsch was shooting Trouble in Paradise, which is it's just an incredibly inventive musical, and it's a delightful movie. Myrna Loy is also in it, and is hilarious in it. I love her. So those are two pre-codes that really stick out to me as kind of must watches. I want to recommend an Ozu book for anybody who's an Ozu obsessive like us. Now I'm going to forget the name of the book because I think it's called Histories of the Everyday. Hold on a second. I'm going to look it up because I forget the name. Yeah, it is. It's Histories of the Everyday. You have the advantage of speaking Japanese. So you can read significantly more writing on Ozu than I'm able to read. I've read almost every book in English that's been published on Ozu. And there are a lot of good ones out there. The Boardwell book, which is out of print but is available as a PDF to download, I highly recommend to anybody. It's a very good book. This book is more academic than that, and than a lot of the more mainstream books like the Ritchie book, but it is a really, really wonderful investigation of his films. And it's also by an author who reads Japanese, and so he is able to look through Ozu's notes. He looks at a lot of primary sources like newspapers and correspondence at the studios that other authors have not had access to for either language or geographical reasons. And so it gives to me a lot more significant insight into what Ozu was doing at the time and thinking. And it's just a really fascinating investigation into his films. So for any other Ozu obsessives like you and me, I recommend that book for sure.
The author is Woo Jung-ju.
Yes.
The Cinema of Ozu Yasujiro, Histories of the Everyday, Edinburgh Studies in East Asian Film. I love how the title is Ozu Yasujiro.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so you have given us so many things to ponder and consider, as well as some great recommendations. And so I really want to thank you so much, Matt, for your time. I really do. I think it was this was a real treat, really was. And I hope that we can do this again very soon.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, definitely. Anytime.
And just before, one last thing before you go, one more time. So your podcast, The Complete, I know that you're currently working on the next episode, but maybe one more time, just one more plug for your great podcast, The Complete.
Yeah, it's currently titled The Complete Satoshi Kon. Although I could also title it The Complete Kon Satoshi. And we are 3 episodes into that. It's available on iTunes and Spotify, I think, all the places where the podcasts are. We have a Twitter account as well if you want to contact us. And yeah, we're going to be recording Paranoia Agent this week. And then we have one more Kon film before we take a little bit of a break and gear up for Agnes Varda, which I'm really excited about.
Oh, fantastic. And I will put all the information as to the podcast and the links. I'll put that in the description box of this video. And so anyone who is interested can, of course, check that out and can access those episodes because they're really, really great, really worth listening and listening and listening. Yeah, I had a lot of fun. So
we try to keep it, I mean, we try to keep it out of time, so you can, go back and listen to each season whenever you want. Basically, if you decide, oh, I'm going to dive into Kubrick this year, you can listen to the Kubrick episodes, and we won't we won't make any references to whatever was happening in 2017 or
Oh,
whatever it is. It's just Kubrick all the time.
I see. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So we will, of course, continue these conversations, and your great podcast work, and yeah, and just looking forward to the Criterion's next announcements and the like. And so I'm sure, yes, we will talk again very soon. But hopefully, we can talk again very soon in another conversation, interview, discussion like this, because again, I had a really great time. Thank you,
Me too.
Matthew Gasteier. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks.
Thank you. So cheers.